you're standing up out of a squat, your hips shoot back before your knees stand up. Now, I'm gonna be training while we do this. I'm gonna be going through just a 20-minute EMS workout. If you don't know what EMS is, take a look at our channel. We've got tons of tutorials on there. But I've been talking with this guy on Reddit, trying to help him figure out his squat form and fix what he's doing and coming out of the bottom of the squat. So I just wanted to take you guys through kind of what I've been working on with him so that it'll help you guys out with your squat form. So if you're watching this, drop where you're watching from, drop your fitness goals, and let me know if you've ever tried EMS before. I'm gonna be doing upper body today, so maybe not the best workout to take you guys through squat form, but let me get started here and then we'll talk about the issues that we've got going on with that squat mechanics. If you've got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll go through questions at the end after I finish up with my workout here. Let's jump right into just the squat mechanics. So what we're talking about here is when you go down into the bottom of a squat, and then as you're coming back up, your hips shoot backwards before your knees start moving out of the bottom. So this isn't for somebody who's lifting, super light. If you're lifting heavy, what you'll see a lot of people talk about online is that, you've got quad weakness, and that quad weakness is why your hips are shooting back. Your quads aren't firing strong enough to lift you out of the bottom. But if you're already squatting heavy, that's generally not the case. But I'll break down kind of the whole mechanics of what's going on here and how I helped him fix that issue. We look at a few different things mechanics wise. The first thing being the bar path. So when the hips shoot backwards like that, the bar path is usually going forward out of the hole, which means forward over your midline. And even just a small forward drift forces the body to save it by shooting those hips backwards to kind of rebalance everything. So that's the first thing we look at is the bar path. And then we do look at the quads, and not necessarily are the quads strong enough, but are the quads staying loaded out of the bottom? And we'll talk about what that means, but the quads need to stay engaged. If we lose that, then the hips have to compensate to make up for that weakness. The next thing we look at is losing your brace or your upper back position in the bottom of a squat. So if your chest softens in the bottom, or those ribs flare and that upper back rounds, then that torso is going to collapse forward. Those hips are going to shoot backwards to compensate. Next thing that we look at is the knee travel. So not enough knee travel. So the knees have to go forward over the toes in the bottom of a squat to allow you to stay balanced. So if we have limited dorsiflexion or like a super wide stance, or we're sitting too far back on the descent, all of those things can make you lean forward or have those hips shoot back during the ascent, so going back up. And then the last thing that we do look at and address is, are we simply going too heavy or are we just fatigued? And then that fatigue is not necessarily always muscle fatigue. We look at CNS fatigue. So this is what we'll be talking about with patterning and muscle sequence. Is your nervous system too fatigued and that sequencing is breaking down and you're falling into bad compensation patterns? It's leading into the issues with your form. And you can hear me grunting and grunting. The workout's already crushing me, and we're not even 5 minutes in. So let's go through each of those things in order here. I'm going to do one more rep here, and we'll talk about kind of correcting each of those issues, And then some exercises that I helped him implement to start correcting those within his own workouts. I switch exercises here. Try not to crush myself too hard. So we can look at just a few different cues to help, coaching cues to help with just the form mechanics of it. So some cues that can actually help that you can think about when you're doing squats if you have this issue is putting your knees forward, pushing your knees forward and then up. That keeps your knees where they are for that first third of the ascent. The next thing is to drive your traps up into the bar, or, well, not necessarily or, and think about pulling that bar hard into your back. So we're getting kind of two things at the same time here. We're getting that upper back to stay engaged by thinking about pushing those traps up into the bar. And then we're keeping those lats engaged by pulling that bar hard down on top of us. So that keeps that entire back engaged throughout the entirety of the lift. It's super important for all your major lifts, all of these big compound movements, that you're thinking about what the entire body is doing, not just the part of the body that's actually moving. So like chest press, we can't just think about the upper body. We got to think about the entire body and what it's doing. Same thing for squats. We got to think about what the entire body is doing as we go through that movement. And the next cue is just going to be mid-foot pressure and a tripod foot. And this will play a little bit into the shoes that you're wearing. If you're wearing like running shoes, for example, when you're squatting, it's going to be really hard to do, but we don't want to roll onto the toes or fall back on the heels. So making sure you're feeling pressure evenly and squeezing the floor with your foot. So you've got the ball of your foot, the pinky toe, and your heel all nicely planted on the floor, and your weight evenly distributed between those. And then I switch this up here. See if I can talk through these. Straight arm pull downs. And then the final cue that I have people think about with squatting, and you can practice this maybe a little bit easier with the leg press, is actively trying to push the floor away from you instead of standing up. And just that little mindset tweak can really help with the mechanics. Because if we were trying to stand back up, that's where a lot of times we get that hinge first and the knees moving second. We really want those moving pretty much the same speed. If you think about pushing through the floor, and again, it's a little bit easier to practice on a leg press. If you think about pushing through the floor, that'll get your knees moving. So just some coaching cues to think about just to help the mechanics. And these are things that you will practice with lighter squats. Do it in your warm-up sets, so then that carries over into your working sets. And then the real bang for your buck is going to be constraint-based fixes or exercises that force you to fix the issues that we talked about in the beginning. So this is my favorite way to correct postural issues, movement issues, patterning issues, is we force the body to fire. We force the body to fire the muscles that we want. We force the body to engage in the ways that we want it by putting constraints on exercises with different exercise variations. Oh, let's get this going again. So we'll talk about just a few exercises that I gave him to basically force all those issues that we talked about in the beginning to correct themselves. So essentially what we're going to do is program these exercise variations instead of heavy squats for 3 to 4 weeks. On that 4th week, typically I have people start implementing squats back into the program so that we can start practicing these things. But we want to make sure that we give the body enough time to have these constraints implemented into how our brain is patterning and sequencing the muscles to fire. So the first one and really biggest bang for your buck that's going to be most effective is pause squats. So you're going to have to go lighter on these than you're doing for your typical back squats. But essentially what we're doing is going down into the bottom of the squat and pausing, just like it says. So we're doing a 2 to 3 second pause in the bottom of our squat while staying stacked and everything engaged. So the other way that you can do this is a dead squat, and we'll get there, but essentially with a pause squat, you're not letting any of the muscles disengage out of the bottom. So that back has to stay engaged, the core has to stay engaged. Most importantly, the quads have to stay engaged. So a lot of times what happens in the bottom of a squat is as we transition from going down to up, the quads disengage as we're changing direction. And then because it's so heavy, we have a hard time re-engaging them fast enough. The hips shoot back, then the quads engage again, and we stand back up. So pausing in the bottom forces all of those muscles to stay engaged. Then as you stand back up, the mechanics will take care of themselves. So that's number one exercise to start to implement. Obviously, you'll have to go a little bit lighter on those than you would for your traditional squats. But biggest bang for your buck on improving your form, adding in pauses and isometrics forces everything to stay engaged and corrects a ton of issues really, really simply. Ooh. The next exercise is going to be a Zercher squat. So if you haven't heard of these, kind of similar to a front squat, a little bit different load, but by placing, and I'll show you guys in a second here with just a stick what that looks like. As soon as I get through this set of rows that are crushing me, but essentially by placing the weight out in front of us, obviously changes center of gravity. That is going to force the core to engage and the upper back to stay engaged throughout the entirety of the movement. So the Zercher squat, we're just going to be holding the barbell and basically our elbows as we go down. You probably going to want to use a pad on that So a little bit different than like a front squat up on your shoulders, but it's gonna be here. And with that weight in front of you pulling you forward, it's gonna force you to fire up your back, force you to fire up your core. So we talked about constraint-based movements, exercises that force you to engage the muscles that we want you to engage. So this exercise is gonna be huge on keeping that core and upper back engaged throughout the movement. So that's exercise number 2 to start implementing. So first one is pause squats, looking at mechanics, keeping the quads engaged. Second one is for keeping upper back and core engaged. So a couple of the problems that we talked about in the beginning, we've now addressed. You can do that with front squats too, but I find circular squats really force you to engage the core a lot more than front squats. Then next up would be what I call dead squats, or essentially squats from the pins. So you're going to set your barbell up on the pins or the safety rack in the bottom of a squat. And instead of having that stretch reflex from having the eccentric, essentially we're going to be doing concentric only squats. So we're just going to be coming out of the bottom and focusing on that. So we're setting the barbell up on pins in the bottom of the squat, getting underneath the bar, and then coming just out of the bottom. So just like a deadlift, that's going to require a lot more force production. So if we do have any strength issues, quads are not strong enough, this is going to help fix that without the bounce of going down into the bottom first, right? I'm going to finish up with a little bit of shoulders here. So those pin squats or dead squats are going to train that exact sticking point. So this is usually the last exercise that I start to implement. So we'll go through those constraint-based exercises that we talked about first. And then add this one in to train directly out of the bottom and build that strength back up out of the bottom. And this is something that you can do with a lot of different exercises to fix, plateaus or sticking points in a specific area. But really the only other thing that we could look at, and I don't have people do this for very long, and this would be to address the ankle issues that we've talked about, and that knee forward position is just heels elevated squats. So you've probably seen these a million times. I would only do these temporarily, but it helps obviously teach getting those knees forward a little bit. Makes it a little bit easier on the ankles and can help fix the mechanics of the knees. Just make sure we do need to get back to training regular squats and not staying with those heels elevated all of the time. So I'm just going to finish up with some rear delt flies here. I got about 2 minutes left. So, first thing that you're going to do is go through those constraint-based fixes. Again, you're going to program those exercises in instead of your normal back squats. For 3 to 4 weeks, on that 4th week, you can start to implement back squats again. Watch your form, film your form. If you're still having issues, go back to the variations. Before coming back to the back squat skin, when you get to your back squats, you're going to be thinking about those coaching cues that I went over. Thinking about those coaching cues that we went over so that the form and the mechanics stay in line with what you're working on. But like we talked about in the beginning, a lot of form issues are not necessarily weakness issues. It's muscle patterning issues and sequencing issues. The brain is not keeping the muscles that we want engaged or not firing at the right time. So those constraint-based exercises will help reteach the brain to fire how we want it to fire during our squats. And we use this method to fix tons, pretty much, we use this to fix all movement issues that we run into with people, all form issues. Choose exercises that force you to fix the issue that you're having. And your brain will actually relearn the pattern, and you will actually be able to correct that instead of just trying different stretches, different mobility things, just running into the same issue over and over and over again. If you guys have any questions on that, I'm all done with my exercise workout here. So if you guys have any questions, drop them in the comments. We'll get this posted up. We'll try to do some more lives like this where I talk you guys through some things as I'm doing a workout. So we'll see you on the next one.